It was still early when Camilla passed through the entrance turnstile of the huge mirrored building in the center of the city. As usual, no one greeted her. His simple uniform, the cart with cleaning products, and the silent steps did not arouse curiosity or sympathy. She had already gotten used to that routine, arriving before everyone else, cleaning what no one consciously dirty, leaving without being noticed. The difference that day was only in the sultry atmosphere of the corridor and the strange sensation that tightened in his chest. Fluorescent lights flashed in the background as she pushed the cart to the executive's floor. The silence of company, still empty, contrasted with the pace it would take in the next few hours. Camilla knew exactly where each paper had been left the day before, which room needed a deeper cleaning, and which room still carried the smell of arrogance she had tried so hard to ignore. She knew everything about that building. Everything except the respect of the people who circulated there. Between one trash can and another, he collected coffee cups left without the slightest care, food packages forgotten on meeting tables, and crumpled documents on the floor, as if they were invisible. Invisible was how he felt. As much as she walked through busy corridors, she seemed not to exist in the eyes of others. No curious looks, no nods. At most, he received a deviation of face, as if his presence were uncomfortable. Camilla had already stopped trying to understand. He learned that in order to survive there, he needed to become part of the landscape. But as she cleaned the printers and arranged misaligned chairs, a quiet force grew within her. It was the same strength that made her get up every day, without complaining, even with a sore spine or a tired soul. It was the same impulse that made her observe every detail of the company, as if she were studying its insides. Camilla didn't just clean desks. She memorized drop reports, absorbed forgotten charts, noticed patterns of behavior. Not because she was curious, but because she had a plan. And even if no one there knew, she prepared herself for much more than mopping the floor. No one imagined how much that young woman carried inside her. Orphaned since childhood, she grew up in shelters and went through temporary homes, where she had to learn early to survive. When he reached the age of majority, he went out into the world with little more than courage and a blank resume. He started as a cleaning assistant in small offices until he got the job in that large corporation. For her, it was more than a job. It was a field of observation. Every detail he saw, every conversation he overheard unintentionally, was another brick in construction of his knowledge. The company mates, however, saw only one cleaning lady, the well-dressed women who entered in high heels dodged her in a hurry. Executives didn't bother to hide their disdain, leaving important documents tossed around as if they were safe just because she wouldn't understand. But he understood, more than they could have imagined, and every snub, every muffled laugh in her presence, served as fuel for something she kept hidden. Camilla was not revolted by the contempt. She just watched in silence and moved on, because she knew, as time passed, his routine had become a precise ritual. It arrived before the first employees, started with the meeting rooms, then the individual offices, and ended in the common areas. The sound of the vacuum cleaners, the shine of the surfaces, the smell of the disinfectant, it was all part of a scenario she knew better than anyone. And even in the midst of the repetitive routine, she found small signs, things that perhaps no one noticed, a different tension between directors, unusual movements in finance, suddenly changing orders. Camilla didn't need a boss badge to realize that something wasn't right there. Despite her social invisibility, she did not fail to pay attention to her every move. As he scrubbed the marble floor, his mind calculated. While collecting garbage from the boardrooms, he organized ideas in silence. It was as if she was silently training for a test that no one knew she would take, and all this without ever bowing his head to injustice. Because even without an audience, Camilla did not allow herself to lose her dignity. In the breaks, when she sat alone in the cafeteria or in any corner, she took the opportunity to mentally write down what she had seen. He was in the habit of reviewing his own observations when he got home. She kept everything as if putting together a puzzle that only she knows what she is going to form. It wasn't just discipline. It was thirst for change, of justice, to show that someone like her could do more. She didn't want to prove anything to others. She wanted to prove to herself that the world could be different from what they made it seem, and there was something even stronger guiding his steps, a purpose that grew with each new day. She was not looking for applause or recognition. He was looking for transformation, and he knew that, even invisible to the world, what he built inside was immense. Camila did not resent the condition she was in. She knew that in order to change her position, she needed to learn more than others. I needed to observe more, be silent more, endure more. And that's exactly what she did, day after day. That morning, as he cleaned one of the meeting rooms, his eyes lingered for a second on a chart printed on the table. Without touching, he analyzed the numbers with agility. There was something there that caught his attention. A downward curve, a flawed projection, a pattern that didn't match. That could mean something serious. But as always, it was not up to her to comment, at least not yet. So he just went about his work, but with a different discomfort in his chest. The kind of intuition that only those who observe in silence learn to trust. She made her way through the halls, wiping shoe marks on the white floor and organizing cluttered papers. Even ignored, she did not let herself be shaken. All the while, something bigger pulsed inside her, something that made her walk with purpose, even when everything around her seemed to say that she was nothing. But she knew. What no one there knew was that behind that invisible figure, there was a trained mind, an analytical eye, and an unwavering determination. Camila did not seek mercy. She wanted opportunity. And even if no one did, she was determined to create her own. And perhaps, without realizing it, fate was already beginning to move in silence. Because where everyone saw only a cleaning lady, what was really in front of them was the key piece of something much bigger that no one had yet seen. If this story has already hooked you so far, leave your like and subscribe to the channel to follow the sequel. The days at the company unfolded like chapters in a silent book, where Camila was always a character that went unnoticed between the lines. Each morning brought the same routine. The alarm clock, the hurried journey between bus and subway, the badge pass through the turnstile, and the calm walk through the white and cold corridors. But even with the repetition, there was something that never became common, the open or covert contempt he received. It was in every look that crossed her as if it were invisible, in every door closed in her face, in every comment whispered loud enough to hurt. Camila had learned to live with it, not because he accepted, but because he knew he couldn't react. His every gesture was observed more harshly than that of any other employee. A mistake of his would take on proportions that others would never face. So she walked carefully, measured in every step. She became an expert at disguising pain and hiding anger. He developed a neutral, firm expression, which he wore as armor against judgment. But inside, the storm was constant. High-ranking officials seemed to have been molded in the same mold. Impeccable clothes, cell phones in hand, hurry in the eyes, and a coldness that froze the environment. Some ignore it completely, passing by without even noticing its existence. Others offer crumbs of humanity, like an emotionless nod or an automatic thank you that felt more like command. There were also those who made a point of demonstrating superiority, purposely leaving garbage out of the trash can, dropping coffee on the ground and moving on, as if it were her obligation to clean not only the physical dirt, but also the traces of disrespect they left behind. At certain times, Camila was faced with cruel situations. She had been interrupted by a mocking laugh when she enters a room. She has found offensive notes pasted on her cleaning cart. She has heard muffled laughter while collecting toilet paper from a bathroom clogged by pure malice. He never answered. He never cried in front of them. He kept everything in silence, with the same discipline with which he scrubbed the floors of the boardroom, not because she was weak, but because he knew that his strength came from somewhere else. She clung to the awareness that that phase was not the end of the road. It was just a stretch. It was necessary to endure contempt, just as one endures a storm when one knows that after it, the sky opens. Therefore, Camila kept her head up. He did not fight back. He did not beg for compassion. He walked among them like a shadow with purpose. She knew that many considered her inferior, that some even avoided crossing paths with her in the elevator. But she also knew that while they lived trapped in their comfort zones, She grew up in silence. Each humiliation was transformed into fuel. She took advantage of her free time to study, using an old cell phone full of cracks, but with enough access so that she could read articles, watch educational videos, learn about the financial market, about leadership, about organizational psychology. Each content was absorbed as if it were gold. At night, in her simple room, surrounded by few pieces of furniture, she took notes by hand. His notebook, with its worn cover, was an escape map, a plan drawn up with calm, patience, and vision. Hostility at work did not discourage her, but taught her. Gradually, he began to understand the mechanisms that govern that world. He noticed how decisions were made, who influenced whom, what were the power games on each floor of the company. She observed the leaders and their weaknesses. He noticed the fears hidden behind the expensive ties and confident speeches. I saw how some trembled in front of an audit, how others masked their mistakes by blaming subordinates. Camila saw everything, and he memorized each piece on that board. Despite her frail appearance, she carried within her a powerful truth. She had not conformed. Behind the uniform stained with cleaning products, there were intact dreams. And the most impressive thing was that she never stopped believing. As much as the world insisted on pushing her down, on reducing her to a worthless position, she resisted, because he knew that it was not the position that defined his value, but what he carried within him. She was made of strength, intelligence, and a razor-sharp hope. Even in the face of an environment that did everything to erase her, Camila never gave into the role of victim. She was aware of the system that despised her, but she did not allow herself to be shaped by it. It was like a tree growing in the middle of concrete, silent, persistent, improbable. So he continued to observe, to learn, to prepare. And although no one there could have imagined it, she was getting closer and closer to turning the tables. There was a discreet beauty in the way she resisted. It wasn't the beauty you see in fashion magazines or in the windows of expensive downtown stores. It was the beauty of dignity, of perseverance, of clarity, of purpose. Camila didn't wear expensive makeup, but her determined expression brightened up the room far more than any imported foundation, and that, as much as others didn't notice, made her special. In the moments when the weight seemed greater, she remembered her difficult childhood, the days when she had nowhere to sleep, the times she went hungry, and he compared it to what he had built. It wasn't much by the standards of that building, but it was immense for someone who came from nowhere. Having a roof, a salary, and a stable routine was already an achievement. And most of all, she had a plan. Something that most there, even with all the privileges, seemed not to have. Camila was still firm, even when everything around her tried to push her to the ground. Even when I felt the weight of exclusion. Even when I swallowed my tears in silence. Because she carried within her a certainty that no one could take away. She was exactly where she needed to be. Each step was part of the climb, and each pain served to make her stronger, more attentive, more ready. That afternoon, as he was washing the cafeteria floor after the employees' lunch, he felt a pang in his chest, not of sadness, but of urgency. It was as if something was about to happen, an inexplicable presentiment, but impossible to ignore. Maybe it would be another day like everyone else, maybe not. She just took a deep breath and continued, as she always did. Because, even though she was ignored by everyone, something in her screamed in silence, "You are going to surprise the world." And without anyone suspecting it, the world around him slowly began to move, as if preparing to see, for the first time, what it tried to ignore for so long. Camila's nights didn't end when the company's lights went out. While the other employees went to bars, restaurants, or returned to comfortable homes, she made her way back to the small apartment she rented on the outskirts of the city. The journey was long and tiring, made in a crowded bus, often standing, but in his mind the next stage of the day was already outlined. There was no room for complaints. The exhaustion was constant, but no greater than his desire to change his life. She knew she couldn't waste time. Every free minute was sacred, a chance to get closer to the version he dreamed of being. When he got home, he would take off his worn shoes and, even with his body screaming for rest, he would sit in front of a small improvised table. On top of it, an old lampshade cast a yellowish light on scribbled notebooks, books with torn covers, and a stack of yellowed handouts. All his study material was a collection of donations, found in second-hand stores or even rescued from the trash by friends who knew of his desire to learn. Some books came with notes from former owners, which for her was like finding clues left by other dreamers. But what really moved her was purpose. Camila did not study out of vanity, nor out of obligation. He studied because he knew that knowledge was his secret passage to another world. He immersed himself in topics such as administration, organizational behavior, strategic marketing, and leadership. He learned technical terms, analyzed graphs, understood the power structures that commanded the companies. He took detailed notes, put together colorful summaries, tested his knowledge with exercises from the internet. He was self-taught out of necessity, but also out of passion. His eyes sparkled when he deciphered a new concept, when he finally understood a logic that had previously seemed distant. It was as if she were assembling an invisible puzzle, where each piece learned took her closer to her goal. I watched free videos on my cell phone, even with the broken screen and the sound failing. I adjusted the headphones with tape, subtitled videos in English, pause each explanation to reread, go back, understand. No hurry was allowed, only progress. It was fascinating to see how I absorbed each content with so much dedication. She was able to make connections between the concepts she studied and the attitudes she saw daily in the company. I began to see clearly the strategic mistakes that managers made, the failures in communication between departments, the waste ignored by pure carelessness. I realized, with some surprise, that many of those who thought they were prepared, in fact, operated on automatic. They reproduced processes without understanding the reasons behind them. They made decisions based on ego, not analysis. And that's where Camila stood out, even if no one knew it yet. As he cleaned the corridors, he observed the dynamics of the company with an analytical, almost clinical eye. He understood how hierarchies were imposed, how certain behaviors were repeated. He knew who the influential, the sycophants, the silent, and the dangerous were. He knew who pretended to work, who covered up mistakes, who embezzled funds, who supported the system with real competence. I didn't need a golden badge to understand what really made that gear turn. The knowledge he accumulated was much more than theoretical. It was a rare combination of disciplined study and practical observation. This combination made her someone special, but she kept it all a secret by instinct. I knew that revealing too much ahead of time could scare, bother, even create barriers. Therefore, she remained silent, with a humble posture, invisible to many, but with a boiling mind. In the silent dawns, while the world outside slept, Camila scribbled plans. I created fictitious organizational charts, simulated restructuring, thought of solutions that could improve the company I worked for. His oldest notebook, almost without pages, was a laboratory of ideas. There, I designed strategies to reduce costs, improve productivity, motivate teams, and implement new systems. They were bold, sophisticated, practical ideas. Ideas that could change realities, and she knew it. More than once he thought about sharing some suggestion, leaving an anonymous tip, trying to get closer, but he retreated. I felt that the right moment had not yet come. In addition, she carried the pain of not being taken seriously. I had tried in the past, in other places, and the answer always came with sarcasm, irony, or that condescending smile that hurt more than any rejection. Therefore, she preferred to remain silent, growing in anonymity, waiting for the right opportunity with the patience of someone who knows exactly where she wants to go. It was this patience that kept her on her feet even on the most difficult days. When her body failed, when discouragement threatened to set in, she remembered the sleepless nights, the pages filled with effort, the grit that no one saw. And then, even exhausted, she went back to school, even if it was only for 30 minutes, because he knew that every detail he learned was one more step towards the top. Camila was not content with memorizing concepts. I wanted to understand. I wanted to apply. I wanted to be prepared not only for a better job opening, but to build something of my own, something big. I silently nurtured the dream of one day becoming an entrepreneur, of creating a company where respect and talent would go together, where no one was judged by their clothes or their position, but by their dedication and intelligence. This vision kept her alive inside. It was like a flame that would not go out, even on the most tired days. While many spent their lives repeating formulas they learned for convenience, she challenged herself to think differently. He questioned ready-made models, tested hypotheses, confronted old beliefs. It was an internal revolution happening in silence, a constant transformation made up of small daily acts that no one applauded, but which had immense value. And even though the outside world still treated her like a simple cleaning lady, she knew who she was. He knew what he was building. He knew the power he accumulated within himself. It was like a dormant volcano, quiet on the outside, intense on the inside. And everything she did, every page read, every video watched, every note made with almost inkless pen, was a way to set the stage for what was to come. She wanted no pity, no early recognition. I wanted preparation. He knew that when the opportunity arose, there would be no room for hesitation. And so he continued, night after night, investing in his own growth as someone who cultivates a rare seed. I knew that one day, this seed would break through the soil and grow strong enough to change everything. Meanwhile, he kept a low profile. People saw her pass by, always with a clean uniform, attentive eyes, a calm posture. They never suspected the universe of knowledge that grew within her. But little by little, even without realizing it, some began to notice something different in that silent girl. Perhaps it was a confident look, the firmness in her gestures, the lightness with which she faced what for others would be unbearable. There was in her a certainty that overflowed in small attitudes, a clarity that intimidated without needing words. And it was precisely this contained force that began to attract attention, even if in a subtle way, because there is something impossible to hide for long, the brilliance of those who are preparing to change their lives. But Camila is not shaken. He returns home that day with a heavy heart, but an even more determined mind. That crisis that so many there feared seemed, to her, just a challenge with several doors ajar. The difference is that few knew where to look for the keys, and she, even on the outside, had already decorated each lock. The idea he mentally sketched in those minutes listening to the conversation was based on something he had recently studied, a restructuring that optimized internal flows and cut invisible waste. Something daring but possible. That night, while others rested or lamented the possible cuts, Camila stayed up late drawing mind maps, analysis models, simulated reports. Alone, in the small room she shared with her younger sister, she filled sheets and more sheets with projections and statistics. That wasn't a daydream, it was a plan, and each number made sense. More than that, it showed that what she saw, few there would have the technical preparation to understand, much less the courage to apply. Still, the next morning, she was ignored. The manager to whom she had shown her proposal did not even look her in the eye. He probably hadn't even read what she had written. Camila was not surprised. It was as if there was an invisible wall between her and that world of decisions. And this wall was not broken with good intentions, but with evidence. It was not enough to just have the right answer. It was necessary to be heard by those who decided, and that, at that moment, seemed as distant as it was impossible. Even so, she kept watching, with the cloth in her hand and the assistant badge hanging on her chest. Camila was a silent witness to the internal disorganization. In the corridors, I heard muffled complaints, fears hidden under tense smiles. The crisis, which at first seemed just a stumbling block, gained dramatic contours. Rumors of layoffs began to circulate. Leaders who had previously been confident now argued among themselves, blaming each other but finding no concrete solutions. Meanwhile, Camila's attentive eyes registered every detail. The flows that did not communicate, the poorly used resources, the duplication of tasks, the lack of strategic vision. She saw everything clearly. It was as if he were watching a ship sink in slow motion, with the sailors more concerned with protecting their positions than saving the vessel. That only reinforced the certainty that was growing within her. If she had the opportunity, she would do it differently. In the following weeks, the atmosphere in the company became even more tense. Cuts began to happen in sectors considered less essential. Some people with decades of experience have been unceremoniously dismissed. Camila watched everything in silence, without showing emotion, but inside it was a whirlwind. I felt the pain of every colleague who left with my head down, while fighting the frustration of knowing that I could avoid it if only someone listened. Then, on a sultry Friday afternoon, a new meeting was announced. All managers were summoned. Camila, as usual, was sent to clean the room before the executives arrived. When he entered, he realized that the environment was different. There was a rush in the steps, a tone of urgency in the looks. Something more serious was about to happen. She approached the door discreetly, as she had done before, and listened to excerpts of the conversation. The scenario was worse than he imagined. The company was on the verge of bankruptcy. Contracts were being canceled, customers losing confidence. The cash flow would not support another 2 months operating like that. And to make matters worse, the council pressed for an immediate solution. The desperation was palpable. It was at that moment that Camila made a decision. There was no more room for hesitation. It wasn't just about proving that I was right. It was about saving a structure that supported hundreds of families, including hers. I didn't expect to be noticed. She would deliver her report directly to the Director General herself, even if it cost her job. It was risky, but keeping silent would be worse. The next day, she went early. He waited for the arrival of the director, who rarely circulated in the operational areas, and approached him politely and firmly. He handed over the envelope with the printed plan, asked only that he read it, and left without waiting for an answer. There was no arrogance in his gesture, only the hope that, perhaps, someone with enough power would allow himself to see beyond appearance. What Camila didn't know was that same weekend, that report would change the course of everything. The director, curious about the boldness of that unnamed employee, read the document between one appointment and another, at first with skepticism. But as he progressed, something bothered him, in a good way. The depth of the analyses, the accuracy of the data, the restructuring proposal. It all made sense. It was as if an experienced consultant had written it. And stranger still, it seemed tailor-made for the problems they were facing. On Monday, early in the morning, the director sent for the manager who had ignored the plan. He wanted to understand why it hadn't been carried out. The answer, full of excuses, did not convince him. More than that, it aroused in him a restlessness. How many talents were being wasted under his eyes because of silent prejudices? Camila was called to the meeting room. She sat shyly, surrounded by men in ties who looked at her suspiciously. But when she was encouraged to explain her plan in simple words, she did what she did best. She showed numbers, connected loose ends, presented practical solutions. With firmness and humility, he guided that team along paths that they themselves had ignored. The room, previously full of skepticism, gradually became silent in the face of the lucidity of that young woman. The director, in the end, did not say much. He only thanked him and asked him to wait for a response. Camila returned to her sector with her heart racing, not knowing if she had risked herself for nothing or if, in fact, she had been heard. In the following days, not a word was spoken. Managers seemed busier than ever, and the buzz among employees increased. But there was a detail that few noticed. Some of the changes that Camila had suggested began to be applied discreetly. Subtle workflow adjustments, changes in delivery schedules, small cuts in areas that were previously untouchable. She watched everything carefully, but said nothing. He knew that if his idea was really effective, it would speak for itself. And that's exactly what happened. In less than a month, the first signs of recovery began to appear. Finances began to stabilize. Contractors stopped falling. Previously dissatisfied customers came back to the company. It was as if the tide had finally begun to turn. And although no one mentioned his name publicly, behind the scenes a question began to circulate. Who was the mind behind that turnaround? The director, now more attentive, decided to discreetly investigate the history of that employee. He discovered his simple origin, his history of overcoming, the lonely nights of study. I learned that she had never been to university, but she had taught herself everything she knew. He realized the obvious. Camila was no exception. It was living proof that talent does not have a fixed badge, nor does it need a golden diploma to exist. The seed had been planted, and even though many still resisted the idea of a thinking cleaner. The results were incontrovertible. Gradually, influential voices began to question the criteria for leadership within the company. If a person without a position had seen solutions that well-paid managers did not, something needed to change. In practice, Camila still occupied the same position, but his name began to be mentioned more frequently at meetings, always with care, as if they were walking in a minefield, but with respect that did not exist before. And this movement, silent and growing, prepared the ground for something even greater. Leonardo, son of the company's founder, has always been seen as the natural successor, intelligent, prepared, and with all the necessary credentials to inherit the family empire. He never had to worry about the weight of being underestimated or ignored. Unlike many of his peers, he grew up surrounded by privileges that earned him prominence, respect, and, of course, all the doors open to him in the business world. But in the midst of that crisis, something began to take shape differently. Something he didn't expect to find on the walls of his own company. The first time Camila caught her attention was in the hallway, when she entered the meeting room with the report in hand. Leonardo watched from afar, accustomed to the hustle and bustle of business discussions. But the way she handed over the document and withdrew without seeking the spotlight was something unusual. He had never imagined that someone on a helpline could have so much confidence, in no hurry to be noticed. There was something singular about Camila's posture, a firm tranquility that contrasted with the tension of everyone around. In the following days, Leonardo watched her more closely. She continued with her work routine, without fanfare, without trying to show off. But it was impossible not to notice the difference in the way she interacted with others. Camila seemed to be in a parallel universe, focused and with an ability to observe the finer details, something that executives seemed to have missed during the frantic race for the company's survival. While everyone was worried about the now, she seemed to see the future, and it didn't go unnoticed. Leonardo's curiosity increased every day. He got closer to his circle of friends and collaborators, discreetly questioning about the young woman who, little by little, gained the respect of those closest to her. The answers she received were varied, but one thing always stood out. People spoke of her with a kind of silent admiration, as if Camila was someone who, in some way, was already far beyond her position. She has a different vision. She understands the dynamics of the company like no one else, were just some of the phrases he heard about her. There was something about the way she moved around the office, as if she knew exactly what was happening in every corner, as if her presence, even without being assertive, was necessary for the gears to still work. Camila was not the type to impose herself or draw attention, but her achievements were there, visible in the small details that made the difference. One day, while he was observing a tense meeting, with negative numbers being discussed, something happened that aroused an even greater admiration for her. The planning team discussed a number of possible solutions to cut costs without losing efficiency. Everyone spoke at the same time, but no one seemed to reach a consensus. It was then that Camila, almost imperceptibly, approached the table and left a summarized report with clear, adjusted alternatives that followed a logical line. Without asking for the floor, she did what others could not. She brought clarity where there was confusion. Leonardo felt uncomfortable, not in a negative way, but as someone who saw something that shouldn't be there. It was as if a hidden talent had been revealed before his eyes. He had never imagined that a person in such a distant position from top leadership could possess such a deep understanding of the company's dynamics. It was as if she was being neglected by someone that had nothing to do with her performance, but rather with the limited gaze of others. But what impressed him most was his ability to stay on the sidelines without desiring recognition. Camila was not there to be seen or praised. She seemed to be completely immersed in her work, moving like a shadow, as if she wanted to make a difference without taking credit for herself. This, for Leonardo, was a turning point. He began to see in her not only an employee who understood the processes, but someone with a rare sensitivity, someone capable of looking beyond the numbers and understanding what was behind the decisions made. That distancing from the search for recognition moved him. It was as if she was testing something on him, something he had never experienced, a true humility, something he knew was essential but rarely saw in the circles of power. Camila was not there to play the status game. She was there, silently, because she believed she could make a difference. And this desire to have a positive impact without wanting to stand out, aroused in Leonardo a genuine admiration, but also something he could not identify, an attraction that began to grow without him being able to control it. Over the next few days, he watched her more, trying to understand the limits of what might be a momentary impulse. But the more he saw her, the more the doubts disappeared. There was something about her that seemed to be the antithesis of everything he had known in his life of privilege. She didn't use her position or her knowledge to assert herself. Instead, she used it to quietly build a solid foundation that sooner or later would make all the difference. In a company that was on the verge of collapse, Camila did not let herself be contaminated by despair. She acted with the assurance of someone who knows exactly what to do, even when it seemed that everyone was adrift. It was then that he made a decision, although he still didn't know exactly what the next step would be. I needed to understand more about Camila, understand what motivated her, how she thought. He knew that she possessed a unique talent, something that, until that moment, he had not known could exist in a person so far removed from the company's power core. He was willing to get closer, to learn more, but what he didn't know was that in doing so, he began to walk through much more uncharted territory than he had imagined. The fine line between professional admiration and something deeper began to blur, and he found himself caught in a web of feelings he couldn't understand. What he still didn't know was that Camila, with her reserved posture and her strategic actions, was already beginning to wonder the same. Although her eyes were attentive to everything that happened inside the company, something about her was also beginning to change. She felt that there was something different about Leonardo, but she couldn't pinpoint exactly what it was. Perhaps it was his more engaging posture, or the fact that he was finally beginning to realize the value of those around him. Whatever the reason, she knew that their relationship was about to change in a way that neither of them could have predicted. What began as a simple silent observation turned into a growing need for Leonardo. He felt that, increasingly, Camila represented something unattainable, but at the same time, very close. Something he couldn't ignore. That impulse, which had led him to watch Camila so closely, now pushed him to get closer to her, not in an invasive way, but in a way that made sense, a natural connection. He wanted to understand what was behind her sharp intelligence, her ability to perceive what others couldn't see, and, of course, what motivated her to be so distinct from other employees. Camila was not someone who sought recognition. She cared only about doing the right job, about contributing in whatever way was most effective. And this posture of his was fascinating to Leonardo. She knew exactly where she wanted to go, but she didn't let it show. It was as if she was playing a deeper game, in which she didn't allow herself to be vulnerable. She didn't allow herself to expose her emotions or her expectations. She was there only for the work, for the responsibilities she felt. This calmness, this certainty, became even more attractive to him. He began to approach, as if taking small steps of curiosity, but with each step, he felt that something else was happening. It wasn't just professional admiration. Something inside him was being stirred, something deeper. And the strangest thing for him was that he didn't know what to do with these feelings. It wasn't like any other situation where he could just indulge in what he felt, because it meant going against everything he'd ever known about the corporate world. The difference between the two was clear and insurmountable. As he tried to understand the complexity of his feelings, Camila felt the weight of this new dynamic. His professional life had always been quiet, with no major surprises. But suddenly, everything seemed to change. Leonardo, the heir always so distant, was now approaching her. He began to look for her more often, to talk more, to ask about her ideas. At first, Camila thought it was just a professional interest. After all, it was natural for someone in such a high position to seek to hear the thoughts of those who worked directly on the processes. But he soon realized that the thing went beyond that. He seemed genuinely interested in her, what she thought, and the way she saw the future of the company. The problem was that, around them, the others began to notice this approach. What once seemed to be just a professional interaction now took on more suspicious contours. What was natural in Leonardo's curiosity became, in the eyes of others, something inadequate. The social difference between the two could not be ignored, and, as much as Leonardo's intention was purely professional, the reaction around him was not the same. Colleagues began to cast glances, low murmurs, whispers through the corridors. They began to question what was happening. The fact that Leonardo, the heir to the company, approached Camilla, an employee of a much lower position, seemed to go against everything they knew about hierarchy and power. Camilla, in turn, felt this change in the environment. She was not naive and knew very well that this type of situation brought complications. She always tried to keep a low profile, to avoid standing out. The last thing she wanted was to be the center of attention, especially for something that was misinterpreted. She saw the changes in the behavior of the people around her. She saw the uncomfortable looks and the hurried conversations that stopped as soon as she approached. She knew that somehow her relationship with Leonardo was creating a collective discomfort, but she couldn't ignore the fact that something between them was growing stronger, something she couldn't control. Deep down, she didn't know what intrigued her most. Leonardo's admiration for her intelligence and the way she saw the company, or the fact that he was starting to show a more human, closer side, something she rarely saw in the circles of power. Leonardo wasn't just an heir. He was someone with his own insecurities and desires, and that somehow made her look at him differently, as if he were more than just the image of an executive who was born with privilege. She also began to feel a certain affection for him, something she couldn't define, but which was becoming more and more palpable. But the reality could not be ignored. The social distance between the two was insurmountable. What seemed to be a genuine approach now became a minefield. The consequences could be great for both, and Camilla knew it. She felt that if she continued on this path, she could jeopardize her position in the company. She had already realized that the others did not look kindly on this approach, and as much as Leonardo's feelings were clear to her, she could not allow what was forming between them to get out of control. The situation was beginning to become an internal dilemma for Camilla. She didn't want to be seen as a simple gold digger, someone who wanted to take advantage of the situation. At the same time, he didn't want to miss a chance to explore what that relationship could bring to his career. But with each passing day, she knew that this fine line between professional and personal was getting harder to cross. And the tricky thing was that Leonardo didn't seem to understand the impact that the difference between them was creating on the corporate environment. Within the company, the conversations began to be bolder. The rumors spread quickly. Some employees believed that Camilla was just waiting for a chance to rise to the ranks, using the approach to the heir as a springboard. Others saw it as a direct threat to the status quo, something that could change the company's power dynamics irreversibly. And the strangest thing of all was that, even with all these trials around her, Camilla felt that she was beginning to be watched with more respect than she could ever imagine. But that respect came with a price, and she wasn't sure she was willing to pay it. The question that troubled her the most was, to what extent did Leonardo really see her as someone with value, or to what extent did he see her only as a person who could help him solve the company's problems? Was he starting to open his eyes to what she really stood for, or was he still stuck in his own status, trying to figure out what he could gain from it all? What she didn't know was that, just as she was questioning herself about Leonardo's feelings, he was also dealing with an inner confusion. He began to see Camilla in a different, deeper, more human way, but he still didn't know how to deal with it. He felt like he was falling in love, but he didn't know if that was really what he wanted, or he was just looking for something deeper, something that would connect him to the true meaning of what he was trying to build for the company. Their proximity was creating a paradox. The closer they got together, the more the social distance between them seemed to increase, making the situation increasingly untenable. Camilla knew this, and at the same time, she found herself on a path of no return. What they were creating, even unintentionally, was beginning to shape their futures in a way that neither could have predicted. The pressure on the company reached an unsustainable point. Camilla, who had always kept a low profile, without making a fuss about her intelligence or her ideas, was now the center of a silent and ruthless plot. As much as she tried to maintain a professional posture, she knew that every day the situation became more difficult to control. The environment, which had previously been only tense, now turned into a psychological battlefield, where the intentions of others became clearer, more aggressive. Leonardo's approach to her, as discreet as it was, did not go unnoticed. His presence, when a subtle and barely noticeable shadow, was now a target. The whispers in the hallway, the suspicious looks, all indicated that something was changing, and not in a positive way. The intrigue spread like a virus, and while Leonardo's intent was genuine, he couldn't realize how much his closeness to Camilla was fueling the hostility within the company. What seemed to be a professional relationship was being distorted, transformed into something that threatened to destabilize the delicate balance of the organization's hierarchies. But the situation really reached a tipping point the day Camilla was placed at the center of a public humiliation, orchestrated by those who couldn't tolerate her growing presence in the company. Those who did not look kindly on her, who considered her a threat to their position or an intruder in the restricted universe of corporate privileges, finally decided to act. The attack was subtle but devastating. In a meeting where tensions were already visible, someone brought up a minor mistake, something that would normally go unnoticed, and used it to publicly discredit her. The room full of colleagues and superiors watched with an almost cruel calm as the sharp words were hurled in Camilla's direction. Everyone's gaze was fixed on her, but instead of support, she felt overwhelming pressure, as the air around her became thicker, denser, making it difficult to even breathe. The intention behind that situation was clear: to humiliate her in front of everyone, to show that she didn't belong in that world, that she had no space there, that her thoughts, her ideas, her intelligence were just inconvenient elements in a system that worked without needing her. The irony was that, at that moment, everyone seemed to see only a part of her, the one that could be easily discarded. But Camilla knew she was being challenged to take a stand, to make a decision. And although the pain was intense, there was a coldness in his gaze. Something inside her said that this attack was just another proof that this place would never be able to absorb her potential. Wounded deeply, but with painful clarity, Camilla knew she couldn't stay there. She would no longer be part of that toxic scenario, where every gesture was interpreted and manipulated to create a narrative that did not belong to her. The emotional exhaustion, added to the lack of understanding of her intentions, made her make a decision that seemed, at that moment, the only possible way out. She didn't want to become a cog in the game of those who played by unfair rules. She knew that her presence there was not being appreciated as it should be, and more than that, her soul was beginning to wither under the weight of humiliation and misunderstanding. With a last breath of courage, Camilla handed in her resignation. It was not an impulsive act, but a choice that sprang from the need to preserve her integrity, to escape from an environment that only made her feel small. When she handed in her resignation letter, there were no signs of hesitation. His eyes, once accustomed to hiding his own feelings, now shone with quiet determination. She knew that by taking this step, she was not only walking away from the company, but also leaving behind everything she had invested emotionally there. There was no going back. The decision was made. She no longer wanted to be part of the game, where the only rule was survival. The toxic environment that surrounded her no longer deserved her talent, her vision, or her passion. Camilla needed to free herself from that invisible prison that had formed around her, a prison created by the expectations and lack of vision of those around her. But in doing so, she also knew she was leaving behind something that could be much bigger than she imagined. The future of the company. That organization, already on the verge of financial collapse, had lost the only person who could see beyond the immediate crisis, to chart an innovative path, a plan that could, in fact, change the fate of the company. And by disappearing without a trace, Camilla was not just moving away from oppressive reality. She was leaving behind the last hope of transformation. The company had unknowingly missed the only chance to get back on its feet, the chance to reinvent itself through the ideas of someone who truly understood what needed to be done to save the organization from ruin. The irony, however, was in how it all happened. Leonardo, who had begun to approach Camilla with an interested look and a growing curiosity, did not yet understand the impact of her absence. He didn't know that, by losing Camilla, he was letting slip the only person capable of guiding him through the chaos that was about to ensue in the company. He was still stuck in his own dilemmas, trying to understand his feelings towards her, but not realizing that what was really at stake was not just a relationship between the two, but the future of a company that was now adrift. As Camilla walked away, the consequences of her departure began to unfold, but in a way that no one could have anticipated. The company, now without that innovative vision, was beginning to sink faster than it had ever imagined possible. And Leonardo, who was still trying to understand her feelings and her position, found himself facing an increasingly complex scenario. where Camilla's absence was not just an emotional void, but a critical gap in the functioning of the entire organization. The tension was about to reach a new peak, and no one knew yet how deep the abyss that would open with the loss of Camilla would be. The collapse in the company was swift and devastating. In a few weeks, the work environment turned into a scenario of despair. Without Camilla's strategic vision, the executives who were at the head of the organization made wrong decisions, which only deepened the crisis. The pressure to cut costs was relentless. Innovations were pushed aside, and the numbers continued to fall, one after another. What seemed like a slow but possible recovery turned into a free fall, where the company found itself increasingly distant from the stability it once had. It was impossible not to notice that Camilla's absence had been a fatal blow to the company's already fragile structure. Her eyes, which had previously observed the flaws and sought creative solutions, were now absent, and with her went the last hope of resurrection from that place. Leonardo, still consumed by the pain of loss, could not accept what was happening. He felt that somehow he had lost it too, not just as a company leader, but as someone who had neglected the potential of an extraordinary person. The weeks without her had been a whirlwind of doubts and regrets. What he had not understood at the time was clear now. Camilla was not just another employee. She was the key to everything. She had been the solution he had been looking for, but which, out of pride or lack of vision, he had let slip away. With each failed meeting, with each desperate attempt to save what was left of the company, he remembered his conversations with her, the way she looked at problems with a clarity he had never been able to achieve. He knew he couldn't let it go. Something inside him said there was still time. Therefore, he decided to look for Camilla, even if it meant going down an uncertain path and perhaps impossible to follow. He began to travel through simple neighborhoods, through communities far from the luxury that always surrounded his life. The places he visited were not those of his routine, places full of power and influence. There, he was not the heir to a large company, but just another man looking for a chance to repair the damage he himself had caused. Each step brought him closer to Camilla, but also confronted him with the reality that his own life, the life he had always known, was in ruins. He had underestimated the value of a person, a woman with rare eyesight, and now he was willing to go any distance to get her back. It was in one of these neighborhoods, on a small street away from the urban hustle and bustle, that he finally found her. Camilla was no longer at the center of business tension. She was no longer under the pressure of being seen as a target. It was there, in a simple place, but one that seemed to reflect a peace that Leonardo had not seen in himself for a long time. The glow of her presence was still the same, but now there was something deeper in her eyes, something that spoke about overcoming and acceptance. She worked in a modest place, but seemed to be more relaxed, more in tune with herself and her own values. There were no more whispers behind her back, nor the constant feeling of being watched and manipulated. Camilla, now, seemed to be closer to who she really was. Despite the serenity that enveloped her, Leonardo knew that there was still a flame inside her, a flame that could never be extinguished. He felt that as much as she had drifted away, that same passion for knowledge and innovation still lived in her. He recognized it, perhaps more clearly than before. What he saw now was not just a young woman who worked as a cleaner, but the brilliant woman he had always known her to be. Their eyes met, and for a moment, everything around him seemed to disappear. He didn't know what to expect. Maybe Camilla rejected him, or maybe she was willing to listen to what he had to say. What he had to offer, he knew, was no longer an empty proposal, but something sincere, something that came from understanding his own mistakes. "I messed up," he began bluntly. "I didn't understand the value of who you really are. I underestimated you, and the company lost a lot for it. But I know that you are the only person capable of changing the situation, not only for the company, but for everything we always seek. You have something unique, something that neither I nor any of the executives can see." Camilla watched him in silence. The decision she had made to walk away had not been easy, but it was something she felt was necessary for her own survival. She knew what the company was capable of and the unbearable pressure he faced. But the doubt still hung over her mind. Would it be possible to trust someone who had publicly humiliated her again? Leonardo had recognized her worth. But what would happen if she decided to return? Would she be, once again, putting herself in a vulnerable position? The silence between them seemed charged with unspoken tensions, but also with a mutual understanding, something they both shared now, the recognition of the value she had and the path he was willing to take to correct his mistake. Leonardo, as much as his position as heir to the company made him hesitate, was ready to do something he had never imagined before. He no longer just wanted to be the leader of a company. He wanted to be a partner to Camila. He wanted to work alongside her, as an equal, not as a boss. He was offering something beyond a simple return to the position of cleaner. He wanted her to be his partner, someone with whom he could build something new, something truly innovative. Camila felt the pressure of a difficult decision. She knew what it meant to be part of real change, but she also knew that returning to that environment would mean reliving old wounds. But, on the other hand, Leonardo's proposal was no longer the same as before. He had changed, and maybe she had changed too. What he offered now seemed more authentic, more in line with what she had always wanted. To be recognized for her worth, not her social position, and to be treated as a partner rather than a subordinate. The decision she made at that moment could not only redefine her trajectory, but also the fate of a company that now found itself at a turning point. The future was there in Camila's hands, and she had to decide if she was willing to give a second chance to what once seemed to be a missed opportunity. Camila, after reflecting deeply on her journey, made a decision that would change the course of her life and the future of the company. Leonardo's invitation was not just a professional proposal. It was an opportunity to start over, to have her value recognized, but more importantly, to transform the dynamics of an environment that had rejected her. She knew that the path would not be easy. Returning meant facing a past of humiliation and mistrust. But at the same time, it brought with it the chance to reaffirm oneself and, above all, to make a real difference. It was time to turn pain into strength. The condition she imposed for her return was clear and without room for negotiation. She would not return to be subordinate to anyone. She no longer wanted to be treated as a disposable piece, as someone who, for a moment, was seen as inferior. Camila was determined to take control of her destiny, and the first step would be to ensure that the company recognized not only her ability, but also her authority. She would not return to a simple position, such as that of cleaner. Her place would be at the top, where she could finally apply all her knowledge, all her strategic vision, and her passion for innovation. By taking over the leadership position, Camila did not just make a symbolic move. She began to work relentlessly, putting her ideas into practice with a clarity that was impressive. His vision was focused, but full of humanity. She didn't treat others as pieces of a big corporate game. He treated each one with respect, but also with demand. His leadership style was firm but not authoritarian. Camila knew that the only way to regain the trust of the team was to show that she was not only an intelligent and capable person, but someone who knew how to listen and understand everyone's needs. Over the weeks, the changes began to be felt. The work environment, once heavy and toxic, began to breathe new energy. Camila was able to reverse the defeatist mentality that took over the company. She instilled a spirit of collaboration, creating a space where ideas could flourish, where creativity was not only allowed but encouraged. The team, which had previously despised her and was skeptical of her leadership, was now beginning to understand the impact of her decisions. The respect she earned was silent but undeniable. Those who had previously ignored it were now attracted by its vision and the power it emanated. The results began to appear quickly. What appeared to be a company on the verge of bankruptcy was now showing signs of recovery. The strategies that Camila implemented began to bear fruit. Sales began to rise, costs were reduced efficiently, and the company's previously tarnished image in the market began to be restored. It not only saved the company, but also brought back the confidence of the market. Camila knew how to deal with numbers, but she also knew how to deal with people. This combination of technical skill and empathy made her an exceptional leader. The transformation was visible not only in the company's finances, but in the internal culture. People began to engage differently, with more enthusiasm and commitment. Camila was able to create a more open work environment where everyone had a voice. She encouraged the personal and professional development of her employees, transforming the company into a place where people wanted to be, where they felt valued and challenged at the same time. The team's morale was high, and this was reflected in everyone's performance. As the results appeared, Camila felt immense pride, not only for having achieved what seemed impossible, but for having done it her way. She did not conform to the status quo. She was not content to follow the established rules. On the contrary, it has redefined these rules. Its success has not come at the expense of others, but rather with the collaboration and joint effort of all. She knew that the company's success depended not only on her, but on a united and committed team, and that's what she managed to build. His transformative leadership is what allowed the company to get out of the hole and return to solid growth. The recognition that Camila received was gradual but profound. Those who once treated her with contempt began to realize that she was the key to success, although they never praised her publicly. Everyone knew that without her, the company wouldn't have stood a chance. Respect was there, present in the silent gestures, in the actions of those who had previously ignored her. Camila did not need verbal recognition. She had already earned the most important thing, the trust of those who really mattered. Now, the company was on a solid path of recovery and growth. Camila, with her clear and strategic vision, knew that this was just the beginning. She had an even more ambitious plan for the future, a future that not only her, but her entire team could achieve. But for this to happen, there was still a lot of work to be done. The success she achieved did not slow her down. On the contrary, she was more determined than ever to take the company further. I knew that now, more than ever, she was an essential part of that success story. Not just an employee, but a leader, a partner, someone who had earned her place in the history of that company. While the company prospered, Camila's past, with all its scars, seemed a distant memory. She had overcome the obstacles that had previously seemed insurmountable. But at the same time, I knew that the journey was not complete. The victory was not only in the numbers, but in the transformation she managed to bring about in the company's culture, in the change in mentality of her coworkers. The company would no longer be the same, and she knew she was ahead of a promising future. But that chapter, the most important in professional life up to that point, had not yet ended. The biggest challenge was yet to come, and Camila was more than ready to face it head-on, with the same passion and vision that had always defined her. And so, with the recovery of the company, Camila becomes a central figure, not only in management, but also at the heart of the story that inspired everyone around her. Her journey, full of challenges, was now an example of strength, overcoming and resilience. She proved, irrefutably, that a person's worth is not in what others see at first glance, but in the determination to fight for what really matters, regardless of the difficulties. If you've made it this far, you know that this story is much more than about business. It's about believing in yourself, even when everything seems against you. If this message touched something inside you, leave a comment saying this message was for me. And of course, if you felt that this content made a difference, leave a like here, because it is through your support that we can continue to bring stories and learnings like this. Now, if you want to see how Camila's journey of transformation and overcoming unfolded even more, there's a video here on the side that talks about similar stories. Click and stay with us.